Hey folks, Jan Morgan here. I am so excited about bringing you this interview tonight. I've been talking about it all afternoon, all evening, and I said if Nikki's up to it after this long day, hopefully she'll come by the room. We're back at the hotel and share her story because I was at the Bama Carry conference today. We are in Jasper, Alabama. We were at the Civic Center all day. There were a number of Second Amendment speakers, all of them pretty much like the same message I had, like Eric Pratt of Gun Owners of America, me, Chris Ann Hall, the folks talking about the Constitution and our rights. But there was this one speaker who brought something totally different to the table. And it's this lady who is with me right now, Nikki Goeser. When she told her story, the audience was captivated. And I can tell you, people cried, people got mad. Her story is one that will amaze you. And she has put her story in this book, Stalked and Defenseless. See here. And I'll tell you after her interview how you can get a copy of that book. But here's why Nikki's story was being told today at a Second Amendment event. Because often when victims, most all the time, when people are victims of crime and a gun is used in the commission of the crime, the victim becomes anti-gun. Nikki is just the opposite, and she's going to explain why she chose to be pro-gun and fight for our rights, even after what happened to her. So, Nikki, let's start from the beginning. For people who don't know you, tell us your story.
Back in 2009, my husband, Benjamin.
You were newlyweds, right?
Yeah, we had been married a little over a year. Benjamin was murdered right in front of me by a man who was stalking me.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, Tennessee state law said that if you were in a restaurant and they also served alcohol,
mm-hmm.
then you were not allowed to carry a firearm, a permitted firearm into that restaurant. It's a gun-free zone. So I followed the law and I left my legal permitted firearm that I normally carried for self-defense locked inside of my vehicle that night.
Mm-hmm.
And the man who was stalking me did not have a permit to carry. He brought a gun in illegally into a gun-free zone. And when I asked management to remove this man because I realized I was being
stalking
stalked,
you, right?
They went and confronted him and asked him to leave. And he pulled a .45 caliber from a shoulder holster under his jacket. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I don't have my gun.
Mm-hmm.
And he proceeded to shoot Ben in the head.
Ben is her husband.
And the entire restaurant is just pandemonium. People are running and screaming, and it's just total chaos. And I'm standing there just completely helpless and in disbelief. And he stands over my husband and he continues to fire 6 more rounds into him. And I will probably wonder for the rest of my life if I could have prevented that. Of course, I'll never know because I was denied a chance. I was stalked and defenseless. So I have taken all of that grief and trauma and loss, and I've tried to educate people about the real dangers of gun-free zones because bad guys don't care about the law.
No, they don't.
And I think that gun-free zones are actually a magnet for evil people because, look, evil people are not stupid. They can be very brilliant in their evil plan.
Mm-hmm.
And these places, they know. Everybody here is helpless.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can stop
defenseless,
me.
Right.
And I think they're very dangerous areas. And, I didn't blame the gun. I blamed the murderer and those who legislated me out of my right to protect myself and my husband.
So how does it make you feel, Nikki, when you see organizations like Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety and people that are on the anti-gun side trying to continue to legislate to put more laws, more infringements on our rights?
Well, I maybe I look at this a little bit differently. As a victim myself, and I hate that word victim. I mean, yes, I'm a victim, but I also consider myself a survivor of this because I don't like the whole victim mentality thing.
Right.
I feel like I've worked very hard to get where I am mentally, to try and educate people, so that they're not helpless, so
Right.
that they have the ability to protect themselves. But I can certainly understand where some people are just devastated and they feel the need to do something.
Right.
They want to do something that they think will end this evil, will stop these horrible things from happening. And I get that.
Right.
I understand that. But I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want evil people to not be able to do these horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like they're somewhat naive in their belief, because I know that evil will always find a way.
Right.
And I don't want bad people to have guns. I don't want bad people to have any type of tool that they could use, including their own fists. I don't want them to harm, good people. But the fact of the matter is, evil exists out there, and they will find a way. And even if you completely were successful, which is impossible, to ban all guns, I mean, come on, look at the war on drugs.
Right.
I mean, okay, let's say you were able to miraculously ban all guns. How long do you think it would take for illegal guns to get back into the U.S.?
Right.
What, 20 minutes?
Or less. Yeah.
I mean,
you're never going to be able to get rid of them all.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, evil people are going to be able to get guns the same way that they get illegal drugs.
Sure.
My belief system is that more good, law-abiding people need to be able to protect themselves and their loved ones in more places, get rid of so many of these gun-free zones, and let people have the ability to protect themselves. It's the basic human right of self-defense. I hear these feminist groups and all of these, women's advocacy groups talk about women's empowerment. And I don't know, I just think my version of empowerment is quite different than theirs. I believe that gun rights are women's rights.
Sure.
We're at a huge disadvantage physically. I mean, it's just a fact. In general, women are just not as physically strong as men.
We're more vulnerable, yes.
Sure. And a gun is a great equalizer.
Yes, it is.
It puts us on equal footing with somebody who would want to harm us.
Mm-hmm. Well, so before we move on into what happened afterward with the murderer, and you said today in your speech, and I really like that, you said, I'm not going to name his name.
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen pictures of him. We know who he is, but you didn't want to give him that attention that he seeks. But I'm wondering, okay, before this happened, obviously you were a gun owner, you carried, but you couldn't carry because it happened in a gun-free zone. In those moments after this happened to your husband, how long did it take you? I mean, was there not a time frame there where you just hated the whole gun thing and just, no, not even for a second?
No. It was almost immediate for me. I knew,
because you wanted your gun, so that you could stop this guy.
Right. No, I knew immediately that I needed to speak out. I needed to, talk to people about the basic human right of self-defense, and that this is wrong. This is wrong to disarm good people.
Well, if you look at most of the mass shootings that happen in America, they happen in gun-free zones.
Mm-hmm.
When you've been on, Nikki, you've probably seen her on Fox News, CNN. You've been all over. You've been on all the networks telling your story when you were telling your story in this book, which I've already started trying to read it today in the midst of this crazy busy day, because I know I'm so anxious to get all of your story. But in all of the interviews that you've done and trying to get the story out, nobody really has heard the rest of the story, and that is what's happened to this guy, your stalker. This is when people today, when you hear this is going to make you mad, because you think if a man walks into this place and just commits cold-blooded murder, and he shot your husband, seven times, point blank, that he would either get the death penalty if it's a death penalty state, or be put away for life.
Mhm.
And that's not what happened. Tell people what happened with his case.
Right. Well, unfortunately, it turned out to be a bench trial. The murderer gets to choose that, and the prosecutor, for whatever reason,
Why doesn't the victim get to choose?
right? I wanted a jury,
Right.
but I talked to the prosecutor, and I was like, I want a jury.
Jury
He said,
trial,
well,
yeah.
he wants just a judge, and I said, well, can't we push back on this? Like,
Hmm.
I need a jury. And at the end of the day, they decided to go with a bench trial. And so it
Amazing.
was just a judge. And despite all of the overwhelming evidence, which I can talk to you guys about some of the evidence, but this judge dropped it from first degree premeditated murder to second degree. And in the state of Tennessee, at the most, that's 25 years. At the most, it's 15 to 25 years. Ultimately, he got 23 years at 100% with no parole. But
talk about the other evidence, because we haven't covered that. You found out later there was a lot more evidence, and you think, okay, well, what evidence do you need? He walked into this place, and in front of a crowd of people, he shot your husband. So,
right.
But what other evidence did police find? It was premeditated.
Right. I learned that when the police searched his truck at the crime scene, they found 2 more guns, ammunition, a baseball bat, binoculars, gloves, rope, and a knife. And this guy that was stalking me had sent me some inappropriate messages over social media, and I ended up having to delete him and block him. My husband asked him to leave me alone. And the day after my husband's murder, now keep in mind, when you delete and block someone, you can't see their social media, and they cannot see yours.
Right.
So I no longer had access to see anything that he posted. But the news, the day after my husband's murder, the news found a social media post that he put up before he murdered my husband, that said, predator versus prey. I know who you are. Run. Where will you work where I can't find you? At home, at dinner, in your sleep, every waking moment. I'll be on the hunt. What kind of life do you have now? And then I also learned that the police discovered, I guess, a receipt in his vehicle where he had made some actual physical preparations that very day. He went and purchased the shoulder holster, binoculars, and a baseball bat that very day. Now, it was an insanity defense. So, of course, the defense brings in their mental health expert. The prosecution brings in their mental health expert. And apparently, both of these experts said they diagnosed him with delusional disorder, with persecutory and paranoia type delusions. And I think the judge put a lot of weight on their testimony. And
that's incredible. So now you have to live with the fact that he's going to be getting out of jail. He's going to be getting out of prison when? How many years from now?
His release date is now October 21st, 2028. And I've learned recently that when they told me he gets 23 years at 100% with no parole, that was a lie. And this happens all over the country. I don't think people are aware of this, but victims are lied to every day in courtrooms across the nation when it comes to sentencing. This guy is allowed to earn early release good behavior credits. So he's not getting 23 years at 100%. He's been allowed to earn the max in early release credits, which in Tennessee is 3.5 years. So he's getting out early. And, I just think that we need truth in sentencing laws across this nation, because I think it's wrong to lie to victims.
Well, I think you're the ideal person to make that happen, to work on that, to become an advocate for that. So and if you're not mad enough already at what has happened to this woman, to her husband, and then the lack of justice in this case, This man is still stalking you from prison and you didn't know it. But tell people about the letters that you discovered from the attorney.
Right. So, yeah, I've recently learned that this man is still stalking me. He's just doing it from prison now. What he does is he's been sending these twisted love letters to my former attorney, the attorney that I used for my wrongful death suit against him, which I won, by the way, but he's indigent, so I get nothing. He's been sending these letters for years, and I hadn't talked to that attorney in years.
Right.
And I had contacted him when I was working on the book to get information for the book. And that's when he told me that this guy has been writing me these letters for years. And it was...
So they're just being held at that attorney's office, but you've seen them now. You've actually seen the letters and read them.
I have seen the letters now, and it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying to me. You know, this guy is saying things like, I've loved you since the moment I met you, and I think about you every day. And even if you move on and find someone new in your life, I'm always still going to love you. And just, he's fixated. He's obsessed. I don't understand it. You know, this...
And he's going to be out of jail in 2028, right? So 8 years from now, he's going to be out of prison, and unless you're able to stop that. Now, you are actually doing some things on that note.
Right.
You've hired a lawyer, you're trying to stop, which is, once again, that's upsetting to me. Here you are, a victim of this horrendous crime, and you're having to hire lawyers to fight to keep this murderer in jail. That's just...
Right. Yeah, victims have to bear all types of costs, emotionally, mentally, and financially, and it's very unfair. But I'm gonna do whatever I can to try to keep this dangerous person locked up, because I fear for my life. I fear for my loved ones. I fear for others. This is someone
if
that
he
should
gets
not be
out,
released.
honestly, I mean, you can carry a gun, but everybody knows if there's somebody wants to kill you, it's almost impossible. If they've got 24/7 to do nothing else but focus on how to kill you, you know, even a president isn't safe, Secret Service. So unless you go into witness protection, if they let this guy out, you're going to be having to look over your shoulder 24/7 all of your life, and you shouldn't have to live that way.
Right.
You should not have to live that way. And Nikki, once again, her book is called Stalked and Defenseless. Tell people where they can get your book, how they can do that and connect with you.
The book can be found on Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. And then there's also my website, stalkedanddefenseless.com.
Okay. So have you, since you wrote this book, have you actually heard from other women who have been going through similar situations regarding stalking and having trouble with the judicial system?
Yes. Actually, the Investigation Discovery Channel.
I love that channel.
They actually did an entire episode based on my book, and that has run in the United States and the UK. And I started getting emails from people from all over.
Sure.
You know, saying that they appreciated what I was saying, and a lot of women who feel helpless, especially in the UK. You know, they don't have...
They don't have no gun. They have no gun rights.
Right.
And there's so much brainwashing in that country. I've talked to a lot of people from the UK when I was on vacation. I happened to be at a spot where they were all coming from for the winter, and their whole mentality towards firearms is completely different from ours because it's the way they've just lived without them for so long. But is there anything that you would like to say tonight to, if there's a woman out there or women out there who are being stalked currently, you know, because social media makes it a lot easier to be stalked, certainly in cyberspace. But, you know, too often I think that people think, oh, they won't really follow through with it. You know, I've gotten death threats before, and I just think, well, it's just, you know, anybody that tells you they're coming is not actually going to come after you. They're just, anybody that tells you I'm going to come kill you, they're not really going to do that. it's the guys that don't tell you they're coming are the ones you have to worry about. That's always been my mentality. But this guy was constantly, I mean, you know, after you.
He actually never made any direct
Threats. He was just trying
It
to
was-
win you over.
It was indirect creepiness, weird.
Mhm.
He was just creepy. Is the best way I can describe it, honestly.
So should women take it seriously when people are, you know, seeming to have social media crushes on them and
Well, I mean, yes, to a certain extent. You know, I've met plenty of people that seem a little bit off, and
Mhm,
you
right.
know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're dangerous. Some people are just a little different.
Right.
But there is a segment out there that can be dangerous, and I went and did my own research online, and I was really interested in, these feminist organizations, these stalking resource websites that are supposed to give advice to women on how to deal with a stalker or
Okay.
what to do if you're being stalked. And I noticed that all of the advice was geared toward, you might want to consider moving, change your career, possibly change your name, don't follow a routine. You might want to get a restraining order, tell your friends and family about the stalker, keep tight notes on everything the stalker is doing. And, that advice might be helpful. That might be something that ladies need to hear. And not to say that men aren't stalked. Men are
Men can get
definitely
stalked
stalked
too,
too,
yes.
but I'm talking about women
Mhm.
here. But the one thing I noticed was nobody is telling women about your basic human right of self-defense.
So
The
the gun
import-
is not mentioned, that you might want to get some
Right.
training, get a gun and have a way to defend yourself.
Right. They don't talk about that option. And I believe that that is a real option that needs to be discussed. It shouldn't be seen as a taboo subject. This is an option that should be presented like everything else, and then let women decide for themselves what will work best for them and their loved ones to help protect them. But why ignore this?
Right.
Why not openly speak about this? I don't understand. I think that it could help save a lot of innocent people's lives. I don't believe that guns are bad. I just don't. I know that guns are used every single day to save innocent lives.
Well, you see, Nikki works for the Crime Prevention Research Center with Dr. John Lott, and you guys, I mean, you actually do know firsthand. You do the numbers, you run the statistics, and you hear the stories.
Right.
How can people get those stories if they want to see? Because you're right, the mainstream media does not tell you about the times that guns save lives. They tell you about all the times that guns are used in the commission of crime, but they don't tell you that over 2 million times every year in America, citizens, I hate to use the word law-abiding citizens use guns in self-defense and save lives. And in most of those cases, the trigger is never pulled. Simply having a gun and bringing it into play stops the threat, which ultimately is what any of us would wish for. No one that I know who carries a gun ever wants to have to shoot anybody.
Right.
But you all see those stories and you tell them. Where can people read about those stories and get the statistics that you all put out?
So I put together defensive gun use stories. I go and do the research. Sometimes it takes a lot of work because mainstream media does
Doesn't
not
tell you.
cover they just don't. They don't cover these
So
stories.
how do you find all this stuff?
You have to go to like local media sources.
Okay.
To try and find these stories, and they exist. So basically I go through and I gather all this information, and then I put it on our website. It's crimeresearch.org. And we show all of these defensive gun use stories, justifiable self-defense, that you don't hear about in the media. And I think the media does a huge disservice to the public because they're constantly portraying guns in a way that, guns are bad, guns are evil. See, this gun was used in another crime. But they fail to tell these true life stories of how good people are able to protect themselves and their loved ones or others using a gun to help save lives. And I just think that they need to be more balanced and fair with their reporting.
I'm going to let you close this out because I've asked about questions, but I want you to be able to share with the people any other message that you want them to have related to the whole gun rights movement or being stalked or being a victim of crime.
Sure. I want people to know that not all victims of violent crime believe in more gun control. You don't hear from us because the media tends to not put us out there and tell our stories. But I've worked very hard to try to get my story told so that people can see the face of someone who is, whatever you want to call it. I hate that word victim, so I'm going to use survivor, a survivor of a violent crime that believes in the Second Amendment and understands that we do have a basic human right of self-defense. And I don't think that guns are bad. I think that it's the person behind the gun, obviously, but I know that guns are used every day to save good people. And I think that's important for people to hear.
One last question, because you've talked about the murderer being, they declared he was, mentally ill. The insanity defense was his defense. Right now, there's such a huge push in America on red flag laws and extreme risk protection orders because they say, and you say this guy, pretended to be, or they said he was mentally ill. And there's a huge push to get guns out of the hands of mentally ill people. However, red flag laws violate your First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendment rights. So I'm wondering how do you feel about red flag laws, knowing that your husband was murdered by someone who was mentally ill?
I do not like red flag laws, and let me explain why.
Okay.
And I'll give myself as an example. Red flag laws completely violate due process. So let's say red flag laws had existed in the state of Tennessee back when this horrible thing happened. Okay, so can we agree that depression is a normal human reaction to something this horrific?
Sure.
Okay. So obviously, I was depressed.
After your husband was murdered?
Yes. And I remember, getting ready to go to bed and thinking, how in the world am I going to wake up tomorrow and face another nightmare day without my husband? And this has been forced on me by this evil person. And I also remember thinking, if the good Lord decides he wants to take me in the middle of the night in my sleep, I am perfectly fine with that because this is awful.
Right.
Now, was I suicidal? No. But you can understand how someone who may be very well-meaning could misinterpret that.
Your depression, right.
And it would be very easy for someone who, like I said, may have good intentions, but they say, oh gosh, this horrible thing has happened to Nikki, and she's
we need
depressed,
to take her guns
and
until
we know that she
gets
owns
okay.
guns.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they're in front of a judge. All the judge has is, an accusation, a complaint, a concern, no due process. And next thing you know, knock on the door. We're here to confiscate your guns. Now, can you imagine
after going through what you went through
that
in a gun-free zone?
A man that was stalking me murdered my husband right in front of me. So I'm scared to death. I'm scared for my safety. And then they go and take away my basic human right of self-defense. I'm living in a house all alone. I'm a widow. I've got no way to protect myself after going through that. I mean, that's trauma on top of trauma.
Yes.
So I think red flag laws are dangerous. There are already laws in place. A lot of people, every state has these types of laws. A lot of the states call it the Baker Act. And, the Baker Act, there's mental health experts involved. There's due process. There's protections. Like if you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided for you.
And they usually remove the person from the public rather than the gun from the person.
Right. There's a 72-hour hold,
Right.
and there's mental health experts involved. There's actual due process. And I just don't see that red flag laws are needed. I think it's a horrible violation of our rights.
Right. Well, Nikki, thank you so much for coming by this late after a long day and sharing your story. And I wanted to interview her during the day today from the convention, but there was so much noise and it was so crowded. And I knew her story was going to be one you would really want to hear. And I wanted a peaceful atmosphere. And I really appreciate you coming by and talking with us in your off time so that you can now go and have a nice rest. And thank you guys for joining us. Listen, once again, her book is called Stalked and Defenseless. And once again, tell them where they can get this.
You can find that on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble.
Stalkedanddefenseless.com also is her website. Stalkedanddefenseless.com. Nikki's story. You're going to be seeing a lot of her. And Nikki, I'm just so excited that we have you. I mean, whether you want to be or not, you are now a Second Amendment advocate out there. You don't strike me as a political kind of person. And I think that's the reason her story